Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Welcome to Midweek Geek here on Geek Therapy Radio. And before we get into talking about the Raspberry Pi 4, that is the Raspberry Pi 4 that the Raspberry team has frankly surprised us with. I remember looking up any updates to the Raspberry Pi 3 a couple months ago, and the official word from Raspberry Pi was that we have no specific release dates, basically no comment on the release of Raspberry Pi 4. But they surprised us, and the Raspberry Pi 4 will be available on June 28th, at least here at Micro Center stores. So I'm looking forward to that. We're going to talk about the specs of the Raspberry Pi 4, but I wanted to talk about something real quick beforehand. I want to talk about Microsoft and Bill Gates basically acknowledging recently in an interview that Microsoft not fighting Android was a $400 billion mistake. So here's my commentary on that. Back when the first iPhone was released, I think it was 2007, and the first Android device was released in 2008, that was about the time, if you'll remember, that Bill Gates was transitioning out of Microsoft to focus his time, retire basically, and focus his time on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and all the wonderful work. Sorry, I'm at work getting distracted. And all the wonderful work they've been doing there in Africa and other parts of the world. So Bill Gates was on the way out in 2006. The iPhone came out in 2007, and Android responded with their first smartphone in 2008 in short succession. The person who took over for Bill Gates, I keep wanting to say Steve Jobs, that's not right. The person who took over for Bill Gates at Microsoft was Steve Ballmer. You may remember Steve Ballmer. When the difference in response from the Android side and the Microsoft side is stark and telling. Steve Ballmer looked at the iPhone and said it was a $500 smartphone, aka, quote unquote, the most expensive phone in the world. And he said, again quoting, "There is no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. No chance." Well, to date, Apple has sold over 2 billion iPhones. So that was Steve Ballmer's response over at Microsoft. Now let's look in stark contrast. Andy Rubin, is that his name? Yep, Andy Rubin over at Android at the same time. They both saw the keynote. They both saw Steve Jobs revealing the brand new iPhone. And whereas Microsoft dismissed it, Ballmer at Microsoft completely dismissed it. Andy Rubin was in the car being driven, chauffeured around somewhere, and he made the driver pull over so he could watch the rest of Steve Jobs' unveiling of the iPhone. It was that critical of a turning point in technological history that Microsoft snubbed it, turned their nose up at it, when Android said, we need to speed our process along considerably because this is the next big thing. We need to corner this market. So that was, in Bill Gates's mind, the biggest mess up of Microsoft's career was not taking the smartphone seriously. So I've said in a previous Geek Therapy Radio at some point where I thought Microsoft went wrong was not just that they didn't compete, is that the product they brought, the Windows phones that they brought to market were so lacking, not just in apps, not just in hardware, anything like that. It just wasn't the same experience you got on the Android side or the iPhone side. And I always thought the biggest mistake Microsoft made in their development of smartphones was not utilizing what they already had and integrating what they already had. They were making low-power Intel Atom chips. They were making other low-power chips. And even right now, they have the technology and the power of these low TDP, low wattage CPUs is so low, 2 watts. You can get around the 2 watts mark, 1.5 watts. If they would have put an Intel CPU in their smartphones and basically made it a dual mode device to where you plug in a display to it in a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, and basically you have a full-fledged Windows PC with you at all times in your pocket. If they would have made the Surface phone, the Microsoft Surface phone, if they would have just done that, we wouldn't be having this conversation today, and Bill Gates wouldn't have to feel bad that it was a $400 billion mistake not to take Apple seriously with the iPhone. That's my only input on that. I just thought it was interesting that Bill Gates, he ended off his statement, about it being a $400 billion mistake with, oh well. Oh well, $400 billion. All right, so let's move on to the Android Pie. That's what you're tuning in for. That's what I promised at the beginning of this segment. First, I want to go off the specs. Remember I said June 28th is the release date for the Android Pie, the Raspberry Pi 4. Here are the specs. It's a Broadcom BCM 2700B0 quad-core A72 ARM processor. So it's 60. So that's all a lot of jargon. It's a quad-core processor, 64-bit processor at 1.5 gigahertz. The GPU is a Broadcom Video Core V1 or 6. Networking, it's basically 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. It's the 802.11b GACN, whatever. It's got good wireless networking going on there. But here's the more important parts. In addition to the new SoC processor, the Broadcom processor with quad cores, 1.5 gigahertz, now the RAM. You're not limited to 1 gigabyte of RAM anymore in the Raspberry Pi 3. You can now get your choice of 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, or 4 gigabytes of LPDDR4 SD RAM. The Pi 3 was still using DDR2 RAM, LPDDR2 RAM. That is ancient. So LPDDR4 RAM and your choice of 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabyte, or 4 gigabytes, that's a massive improvement. The new Raspberry Pi 4 is going to be leaps and bounds more powerful, on the order of 2 to 4 times, according to Raspberry, than the outgoing Raspberry Pi 3 or B plus, whatever, the latest, most powerful edition of the Raspberry Pi. Bluetooth is now 5.0, and it's Bluetooth Low Energy, BLE. You still get the same 40 GPIO pins. The storage is still micro SD card. I was kind of wondering if it would get an M.2 interface, but that was kind of wishful thinking. The whole point of these boards is that they are made to cost. The other biggest things here is it gets gigabit Ethernet and USB 3.0. USB 3.0, that's important because now that micro SD card slot is no longer on the old USB 2.0 protocol. It is now on USB 3.0 protocol, which means it's all the faster. It'll support your high capacity, high data rate micro SD cards. And if you like to boot off of a USB stick, it'll support full USB 3.0 speeds. That is amazing. Those are some major improvements to the Raspberry Pi 4. So how much will all of this... Actually, let's go over port selection, because it's not... Well, it has changed a little bit here. You get 2 micro HDMI ports, not just the one HDMI port. From the old outgoing model, the Raspberry Pi 4 has 2 HDMI 2.0 ports. That means it supports up to 4K at 60 hertz per port. We'll see how well that's implemented, but you can do up to 4K 60 hertz out of the 2 micro HDMI 2.0 ports. You still have the 3.5 millimeter analog audio and video jack, so it outputs composite video, as well as audio, 2 USB 2.0s, 2 USB 3.0s, like I just mentioned, the gigabit Ethernet that I just mentioned, the camera serial interface, and the display serial interface as well. It is all very cool, but let's talk about price. The 3 flavors the 3 flavors of Raspberry Pi 4 come in $35 for the 1 gigabyte model, $45 for the 2 gigabyte model, and $55 for the 4 gigabyte model. My money is on the 4 gigabyte model. I think that's your best value. For $20 more, you go from 1 gigabyte of RAM to 4 gigabytes of RAM. That is massive. So I am stoked that Raspberry Pi has released the 4. It was kind of fun to wake up a couple days ago and see Raspberry Pi 4 has been announced and here's the release date, because they really kind of just snuck it on us. Here's what I would like to see, though, and I know a lot of you might be thinking right now, is there an update coming to the Raspberry Pi Zero, the $5 Raspberry Pi Zero? Unfortunately not. There's no update in the pipes currently working for the Raspberry Pi Zero, and it's for the reason that you may be suspecting. Just that $5 is a very, very hard price point to hit, and the technology in the manufacturing process for CPUs isn't there that we can kind of get there. I think it's 22 nanometer process for the new Raspberry Pi 4. It's just very hard to hit that price point for the Raspberry Pi Zero. So as excited as I might be that this may be heralding in a new Pi Zero, it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. That being said, we weren't expecting a Pi 4 anytime soon, and they snuck that on us. So are they being cheeky over there at Raspberry? I hope so. Maybe we'll see a Raspberry Pi Zero. Thank you for watching or listening to Midweek Geek here on Geek Therapy Radio. Be good to each other. Be good to yourselves. Embrace your geek thing. Lean into your geek thing. And know that you are not alone, especially here on Geek Therapy Radio. Until next time, take care, my geeks.